The Forge of Harlem. Lou Sims wasn't born into the storm. He was the storm. Harlem in the early 1980s was a crucible of broken dreams and ruthless ambition. By the time Lou could tie his shoes, he had already learned that survival came not through kindness, but through dominance. His family, scattered and scrabbling to survive, offered little solace. Lou's older brothers introduced him to the hustle early, but it wasn't just the hustle, it was the code. Harlem's streets demanded respect, but they only respected blood. Lou quickly realized that power didn't come to those who asked for it. It had to be ripped from the hands of the weak. And rip he did. By the time he was a teenager, Lou wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. His name whispered in alleys, bodegas, and project stairwells. The older hustlers recognized something in Lou that terrified even them. A relentless drive paired with an utter lack of fear. The making of a monster. Fat Leon, the mastermind of the 142nd Street Lynchmob, saw in Lou a younger, hungrier version of himself. It wasn't long before Lou became Leon's enforcer, a role he embraced with deadly precision. Lou didn't just enforce rules, he created chaos. His brutality wasn't just a tool, it was a spectacle. Harlem had its fair share of killers, but Lou stood apart for one reason. He didn't just kill, he made examples. Take Darnell Wells, for instance. Wells thought he could outsmart the Lynch mob by skimming profits and slipping away unnoticed. Lou hunted him down like prey, using Wells's own bike to lure him into a deadly trap. The bullets that ended Wells weren't just a punishment, they were a statement. Witnesses described Lou walking away from the scene, his face expressionless, the smoking gun dangling in his hand like a painter admiring his work. A reign of terror. From 1988 to 1994, Harlem was Lou's personal kingdom of terror. The Lynch mob ruled not just with drugs, but with fear. Lou ensured that every transgression was met with a response so brutal, so unrelenting, that even the thought of crossing the mob became unthinkable. When Donald Duck Moore robbed one of the Lynch mob's crack spots, he sealed his fate. Lou and his crew tracked Duck to 141st Street, where the air hung heavy with tension. Lou didn't waste words. He raised his .45 caliber and ended Duck's life in broad daylight, his body slumping to the pavement as neighbors slammed their windows shut, too scared to even watch. Murder without borders. The Lynch mob's ambition stretched far beyond Harlem. Alabama became a critical outpost for their drug empire, but it wasn't without its challenges. Christopher Davis, a small-time hustler, dared to defy the mob by refusing to return stolen drugs. For Lou, this wasn't just a loss of money, it was an affront to his power. Dressed in black, armed with revolvers, Lou and his crew descended on a seedy game room in the heart of Avondale. Witnesses described the air thick with cigarette smoke and desperation as Lou walked in, his steps slow, deliberate and menacing. When the gunfire erupted, it wasn't just an execution, it was a storm of vengeance. Davis's lifeless body lay sprawled amidst the shattered remains of pool tables and broken dreams. The hospital ambush. One of Lou's most infamous acts was his attempt to finish what bullets couldn't. Harold Breeze Brown had survived a hail of 15 gunshots, a miracle that enraged Lou. Breeze was recuperating in Harlem Hospital under heavy sedation and the protection of hospital staff. But to Lou, wolves and guards were mere inconveniences. Dressed as medical personnel, Lou and his crew infiltrated the hospital with surgical precision. Knives hidden beneath their disguises, they maneuvered through the sterile halls, their intent clear: finish the job. Though the attempt failed, the audacity of the act sent shockwaves through Harlem. Lou's message was clear: no one was untouchable. The butcher of Harlem, Lou's violence wasn't just targeted at rivals, it engulfed innocent lives. The 1993 murder of Jansen Jade Black Smalls was a testament to Lou's capacity for indiscriminate brutality. Smalls had threatened Ferris, one of Lou's associates, a mistake that would cost him everything. The hit was a masterpiece of terror. Lou orchestrated an escape route for Ferris, ensuring that even as chaos erupted, his crew remained untouchable. When the dust settled, Smalls was dead, and an innocent bystander lay paralyzed, a collateral victim of Lou's relentless quest for control. Prison, the predator. The unforgiving streets. Harlem streets have a way of marking people, and for Lou Sims, the scars ran deeper than the flesh. Even now, long after the blood had dried, the whispers of his name hung in the air like the echo of a gunshot. Each corner he once ruled now bore the weight of his deeds, and while Harlem had moved forward, it could never fully forget. Lou didn't just walk these streets, he haunted them. The people who survived his reign of terror knew the cost of crossing him. Many refused to speak his name aloud, fearful of summoning a ghost they thought they had buried. Others, the younger generation, treated him like a legend, romanticizing his brutality without understanding the ruin it had left behind. For Lou, it was a strange duality. Hero to some, villain to most, and a man forever caught between the two. Psychological warfare. Lou's dominance wasn't just about violence, it was psychological. He had mastered the art of fear, and his victims often broke long before the gun ever came out. Those who owed him money or dared to step on his territory found themselves living in a waking nightmare. Late-night knocks on the door, whispers in the dark, and menacing stares from shadowy figures became the prelude to a reckoning. Lou didn't just want his enemies dead, he wanted them to crumble from within. One of his cruelest tactics involved family. If a rival refused to cooperate, Lou wouldn't hesitate to make their loved ones collateral damage. A teenage boy in the wrong place, a grandmother who had seen too much, Lou's wrath spared no one. To him it wasn't personal, it was business, and business in Harlem demanded sacrifices, the fall of heroes. By the mid-90s, the Lynchmob had become too big to hide. The very empire Lou had built became his undoing. The FBI, armed with wiretaps, informants, and an unrelenting drive to dismantle Harlem's drug networks, closed in. Lou knew it was only a matter of time. He had seen the signs, the thinning ranks of his crew, the sudden silences from once loyal associates, the new faces watching from unmarked cars. The day of his arrest wasn't dramatic. There were no shootouts, no desperate escapes. It was cold, methodical, and final. The feds came with an indictment thick enough to weigh down the table, detailing years of murder, drug trafficking, and conspiracy. Lou stood silent as the charges were read, his face a mask of indifference. But inside, he knew the life he had built was over. Prison, the shadow of justice. Prison wasn't just confinement for Lou, it was a battlefield of its own. His reputation preceded him, and while it afforded some protection, it also painted a target on his back. Rival factions, guards with vendettas, and the crushing monotony of life behind bars tested Lou in ways the streets never could. There were moments of unimaginable darkness. Lou watched as men, hardened by years of street violence, broke under the weight of their sentences. Some turned to drugs smuggled in through the cracks in the system. Others found solace in religion, trading their gang affiliations for the promise of redemption. Lou chose the latter, not out of weakness but necessity. Islam gave him structure, a way to reconcile the life he had taken and the one he still had to live. But redemption was slow. The nights were long, haunted by the faces of the dead. In his cell, Lou relived every crime in vivid detail. The pull of the trigger, the flash of fear in his victim's eyes, the suffocating silence that followed. It wasn't guilt that tormented him. It was the knowledge that his actions had carved a legacy he could never escape. The weight of freedom. When Lou was finally released, the world had changed. Harlem was no longer the same battleground he had once ruled. Gentrification had swept through the neighborhood, replacing crack houses with coffee shops. And the new generation of hustlers cared more about Instagram clout than respect on the block. For Lou, freedom was bittersweet. He had spent decades building an empire, only to emerge into a world that no longer cared. The young bloods who recognized him did so out of fascination, not fear. They wanted stories, not guidance. Lou, now an old man with a face weathered by time and regret, struggled to find his place. The dark legacy. The scars of Lou's reign remain etched into Harlem's history. Families still mourn the dead, their grief compounded by the knowledge that justice, even when served, can never bring back what was lost. Lou's name is both a cautionary tale and a grim reminder of what Harlem once was. And yet, there's a strange kind of respect for him, a reluctant acknowledgement of his resilience, his refusal to break even when the world conspired to destroy him. Lou Sims is a man who lived and thrived in the darkest corners of humanity, who embraced the monster within because the streets demanded it. Lou Sims, now far removed from the height of his reign, lives in the long shadow of his past. Freedom for him was not a clean slate. It was a canvas already painted with blood. The streets he once ruled have forgotten his name, but the families of his victims and the survivors of his wrath remember. Lou knows this. It's why he walks through Harlem with his head held high, but his steps measured, aware that vengeance, even after decades, can strike at any moment. The price of reflection. In the quiet moments of his life, Lou reflects on what he left behind. He thinks about the men who died at his command, and the innocent lives caught in the crossfire. He remembers the young boys who looked up to him, eager to follow in his footsteps, not realizing the cost of the life he led. Lou sometimes visits their graves, standing silently as if in penance. He doesn't cry. The streets robbed him of that kind of vulnerability long ago. Instead, he prays. Islam remains a pillar in Lou's life. The religion that gave him structure in prison now provides him with a semblance of peace in freedom. He prays 5 times a day, not just for forgiveness, but for guidance. Lou knows he can never undo the past, but he hopes to at least shape a future that carries less pain. The ghosts of Harlem. Harlem, though transformed, still whispers the names of its lost legends. Lou is one of them. The young men on the corners don't know the full story, but they know enough to admire him. To them, he's a myth, a relic of a bygone era when men like Lou commanded respect through sheer force of will. They don't see the weight he carries. They don't hear the screams that haunt his nights. Lou has tried to warn them, to guide them away from the path he once walked. But the allure of fast money and street fame is strong, and his words often fall on deaf ears. He doesn't push. He knows that the streets teach their own lessons, and they rarely show mercy. A legacy of pain. Despite his attempts at redemption, Lou's legacy remains a dark one. The families of his victims still grieve, their lives permanently scarred by his actions. The community he once terrorized has moved on, but the wounds he inflicted haven't fully healed. Lou knows this. It's the reason he keeps a low profile, avoiding the spotlight and living a life of quiet reflection. Occasionally, a journalist or a filmmaker will approach him, eager to tell his story. Lou always declines. He's not interested in glorifying his past. He doesn't want to be a cautionary tale or a hero. He just wants to live the years he has left in peace. The final reckoning. As the years pass, Lou's body begins to fail him. The toll of a life spent in violence and confinement is evident in his slow, deliberate movements. He spends more time in the mosque, finding solace in prayer and the community it provides. His once sharp mind sometimes drifts, lost in memories of a life he wishes he could forget to see. Lou's life was a storm, and though the skies have cleared, the damage remains. Harlem moves forward, but it never forgets. And neither will the world that once knew Lou Sims as both a king and a cautionary tale. Lou Sims, the man once known as Homicide Lou, doesn't fade away like many would expect. Instead, he continues to exist in the shadows, navigating a world that no longer resembles the one he once ruled. The streets may have changed, but Lou hasn't lost his ability to adapt, a skill that kept him alive through decades of chaos and violence. The invisible presence. Lou lives a life of quiet resilience. He doesn't walk the streets of Harlem with the swagger of his younger years, but his presence is still felt. To those who know, Lou is a ghost, a reminder of the old Harlem, a time when men like him ruled blocks with iron fists and ruthless codes of loyalty. He avoids direct confrontation, but his reputation protects him like an invisible shield. Lou keeps tabs on the streets, watching how the game has evolved. The crews are younger, sloppier. Social media has turned the once clandestine world of drug dealing and crime into a spectacle. Lou shakes his head at the recklessness. They don't know what real pressure is, he mutters to himself. The weight of running an empire, evading law enforcement and keeping order was a chess game he mastered. And he knows most of today's players would crumble under that kind of stress. A reluctant mentor. Though Lou keeps to himself, the younger generation occasionally seeks him out. They've heard the stories, and some see him as a legend worth emulating. Lou doesn't take pride in their admiration. Instead, he tries to steer them away from the life he once lived. You think being feared is enough? He asks one ambitious young hustler who comes to him for advice. It's not. Fear makes you a target. Respect is what keeps you alive, but even that's temporary. Sometimes Lou wonders if his warnings make a difference. For every kid he reaches, there's another who ends up behind bars or in a grave. He carries that weight silently, knowing he can only do so much. The hunt for redemption. Lou isn't content with just surviving. He feels a gnawing sense of responsibility for the damage he caused during his reign. He spends his days quietly giving back to the community he once terrorized. It's not publicized. He avoids cameras and reporters. Instead, he funds scholarships anonymously, supports re-entry programs for ex-convicts, and mentors troubled youth through backdoor channels. Still, redemption is elusive. Lou knows he can't erase his past. The families of his victims will never forgive him, and he doesn't expect them to. He doesn't even forgive himself. But he keeps moving forward, one small act of atonement at a time. Enemies in the shadows. Not everyone believes Lou deserves a second chance. There are still those who remember him as the man who destroyed lives, the enforcer of the Lynchmob, who executed orders without hesitation. Old enemies or the children of his victims occasionally surface. Lou is always ready. He still keeps a weapon close, though he prays he'll never have to use it.